Very happy Sabbath, church. Thank you, Ethan, Reese, Sister Edith, and Brother Jonald for the special message in song. Thank you. Today is a special Sabbath in that we have communion, and I would like to present to you the sermon which is entitled The Humility of Jesus. And this was part one, because the next communion that we have will still tackle on this particular theme and subject. The verse that was read earlier was found in 1 Peter chapter 5 and 6, which says, "Likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders." The second line, it says, "Yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble." And the third line, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time." So Peter first addresses the young people. Young people. The elders here are primarily your parents, then the spiritually mature people in our church community. But it is not just a command for the young people to respect the elders. To be submissive and humble is not just a one-way street. It goes actually both ways. In fact, in the second line, it says, "Yes, all of you be submissive to one another." So it goes both ways, and in fact, in all ways, horizontally. We need to be submissive to one another, young and old. Be submissive to one another, be clothed with humility. Now, as adults, we can become intensely irritated, angered, and enraged, provoked, and infuriated with our young people. In other words, you find yourself exasperated by our children. But as parents, we are capable of provoking the same feelings in our children too. It goes both ways. However, since their brains are still developing, the long-term impacts of constantly exasperating them has severe negative relational and behavioral consequences. And so God, in His wisdom, warns parents to guard themselves, the elders, from exasperating the young people or the children. So whilst there is a command that says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, and honor your father and your mother," which is the first commandment with a promise. Whilst there is a command to that, in the same vein, we are also urged that parents or fathers do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction or admonition of the Lord. So the spotlight here turns directly to parents. The verse is pretty clear that God holds responsible for how we, as adults, as elders, use our authority. We all want to be good parents, but sometimes in wanting to do the right thing for our children, we end up doing it the wrong way because of how we approach it. And when we do the right thing the wrong way, we exasperate our children. You know, the last thing that we want to see happen for our children is that they lose heart. When they do, we lose one of the most important battles in our lives, the battle for our child's hearts. Now that Peter has addressed the horizontal aspects, Peter then goes on with the other dimension, the vertical aspects. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. He now comes with the vertical level. After addressing the horizontal level, or how we deal with each other, now it's going up now towards our God. And when God, through Peter, asks us to be humble before God, we have to understand that he only asks us to do things that he has already done himself. He is not asking things for us to do that he himself hasn't done it already. And that's the reason why I will present to you briefly the humility of Jesus. Now, there is a story about a huge ship hit by a giant, unusual wave. The lights went out, smoke pours into the rooms, and amid all the confusion, the ship flips over. Because of the air that is trapped inside the ship, it floats upside down. But in the chaos and in the darkness, the passengers were scrambling and they can't figure out what's happening. And they scrambled to get out, primarily by following the steps to the deck. The problem is that the top deck is now 100 feet underwater. And so in trying to get to the top of the ship, they drowned. The only survivors are the few who realize that everything has been actually turned upside down. And so they did the opposite of what everyone else has been doing. They climb up into the dark belly of the ship until they reach the ship's body. And their rescuers hear them banging, and they cut them free. They were saved because they realized that the ship that they were in was now turned upside down, and they acted from therein. In a sense, that's what Jesus did when he ministered on earth about 2,000 years ago. He turned everything upside down. The message that he brought was so radical that only a few grasped that message. It runs so contrary to all that the people understood, and probably that is seen best as he and his disciples gather to share their last meal together. They have been walking through the city streets of Jerusalem. They either walk barefoot or with open-toed sandals like this. And the streets are dusty and filthy. And then they arrived at their destination where the Passover meal has been prepared. And they take their seats. But there are no servants to wash their feet, as would be the standard practice. And so they sat there waiting who was going to do the job. The disciples certainly would not do it. It was so far below them. It's like when sometimes the deacons and the departments would call occasionally and ask who would help us clean the church for a general cleaning. 3.5 years with the most excellent teacher. And that's not just once a week session. That's everyday session with the best teacher in the world, Jesus. Every day with Jesus for 3.5 years. It's like graduating with 2 PhDs. And yet these disciples are still comparing themselves against one another. Comparing themselves as to who is the greatest. Do you remember the mother of James and John who came to Jesus and made a request for her sons to hold the most important office next to Jesus? Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons kneeling down and asking something from him. She said to him, "Grant that these 2 sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left in your kingdom." She's saying, when you get to the throne, Jesus, please ensure that James is appointed as the chief financial officer and the other one is the vice president for religious affairs. Jesus replied to her, you don't know what you're asking. And you know what? When the 10 heard of it, the 10, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself. The Bible records that he says, you know, the rulers of the Gentiles, they lord over them. And those who have great authority exercise their authority over them. But it shall not be so among you, because whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. You don't know what you're asking. You don't know what you're comparing. You don't know what standard you are talking about. A woman asked for an appointment with her pastor to talk with him about a besetting sin, which she was really worried. And when the sister saw the pastor at the appointed time, she then said to the pastor, Pastor, I have become aware of a sin in my life which I cannot control. Why? What happens? Well, Pastor, every time I am at church and I begin to look around at the other women, I then realize that I am the prettiest one in the entire congregation. None of the others can compare with my beauty. What can I do about this sin? The pastor replied, my sister, to begin with, that's not a sin. Really? Not a sin? No. Well, your comparison is primarily just a mistake. You don't get it? Get it later. The question is, who do we compare ourselves against? Do we compare ourselves with a struggling brother or sister in the church? Or do we compare ourselves with the righteousness of Christ Jesus? Jesus is about to die, and the disciples, for every day's session, sleeping with him, dining with him, receiving instruction every day for 3.5 years, yet they are still comparing themselves against one another. Somebody at this point asked if Jesus made a serious mistake in choosing his disciples. The disciples are waiting until Jesus stands up, takes up his jacket, rolls up his sleeves, pours water into a basin and says he's going to wash their dirty feet. Moves towards Peter. Peter becomes indignant. He asks, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? With a tone of disbelief. The subtext to this question, are you kidding me? You're not going to wash my feet? That would be improper. That action would turn upside down the social order of our relationship. You are the master, I'm just the disciple. You are the teacher. Rabbinical commentary tells us that a master could not even require a servant to wash his feet. However, that servant or that disciple would occasionally wash their teacher's feet in their own volition as a sign of devotion. Peter was firm and emphatic, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus then replied to Peter, if I don't wash your feet, then you don't have any part of me. When Jesus started to wash the feet, you could have heard a pin dropped. It's unbelievable. It's turning upside down the order of social relationship. And you can then see why Peter said, submit to one another. It's not just the young that would be humble towards the elders. It's us that needs to be humble as well to our kids. Many times I don't get it right as a father. And so there are times where I have to approach my son and ask apology for my action. If you cannot do that, how can you represent who God is to your children? If you are always right, and there's no room then for you to ask forgiveness and apology, then we got it wrong. The atmosphere, what is electrifying, this was unthinkable. He is their teacher, their leader. He's the one they know as the Son of God, and he's the one they have identified as the Christ, the Messiah of Israel, and here is engaged in such a lowly task. Now, if we don't partake Christ's humility, if that is not our attitude towards each other, we will never grow as a church, and we will have no parts in eternity. The pride of life is not of the Father, but it is of this world. Jesus' washing of Peter's feet is necessary. It is necessary for him to have a share with Jesus. To have a share with Jesus actually means to have a share of his life, his suffering, his humiliation, but also of his joy, his victory, and the life eternal. But the attitude of humility. Desire of Ages, 83. Paragraph 4, it would be well for us to spend a thoughtful hour each day in contemplation of the life of Christ. We should take it point by point and let the imagination grasp each scene, especially the closing ones. Finally, I would like to emphasize this restraint and humility on the part of Christ Jesus. You know, feet washing is not just a way of earning heaven. Only Christ can give that. Rather, it's a way of showing Jesus to a lost and perishing, proud, blind world. And that there is a different way of dealing sin. You know, the Messiah, when he came to earth, he did not use conventional power, might, and authority to usher in the kingdom. The foot washing or the feet washing is a powerful symbol that is a paradox that Jesus embodies. God's power is demonstrated through restraint and humility rather than force and ego. This is a raging river full of uncontrolled power and energy that runs furiously through a valley. But by building a dam on that raging river, at least humankind is able to restrain the power of currents, the powerful currents of water, and humanity is able to harness the energy to provide electricity to an entire city. And so the restrained power of the river is far more powerful than the unbridled water left to its own devices, because it brings now power to the rest of the city, brings industries to work, and a catalyst of future progress in that particular sense. So in foot washing, Jesus is foreshadowing what is to come on that Friday, his arrest, and on that crucifixion, the willful act of God to humble himself in order to save humankind. This is restraint and humility. When you are all-powerful and you are challenged with his words, if you are the Son of God, like you claim you are, save yourself and come down from that cross. And then when you are taunted with saying, well, he is able to save himself, others, but he could not save. Look, he could not save himself. That kind of temptation is unique to Christ. You cannot be tempted with that kind of temptation because you don't have the power to do that. But Jesus has the power to call his angels and turn this blasphemous people into dust in just 1 second. There is a song that says he could have called 1,000 angels. I would say that he doesn't need to call 1,000 angels. Maybe just one strong, powerful angel is enough to deliver him and to rescue him. but it is about restraint of that power and the humility that he demonstrated to us in order to end sin. You don't fight sin with sin. You fight sin with restraint and humility. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you and me in due time. God bless us.
We continue our worship in